Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are tackling a question that is really foundational to how any society works.
Yeah.
It's a question of authority.
Authority.
But not just any authority. Specifically, we're talking about epistemic authority.
Okay, let's pause right there. That's a heavy word to drop in the first minute. Epistemic. Before we go any further, you have to break that down for us.
Sure. No, absolutely. So epistemology, at its simplest, is the study of knowledge. It asks the question, how do we know what we claim to know?
How do we know it's real?
Exactly. So epistemic authority is really about the right to make a truth claim. Who in a society gets to stand up and say, this is a fact, and maybe more importantly, why do we believe them?
Right. Is it because they have a PhD? Is it because they have data and charts?
Or is it because they wear a certain uniform or hold a holy book? It's a contest for who gets to set the baseline of reality for everyone else.
Who owns the baseline? I like that. It's the battle for the baseline.
It is. And, usually when this comes up, we think about governments or maybe universities, the press. But today, we're diving into a really specific and, I think, explosive moment in recent intellectual history where the rules of that game were fundamentally challenged.
Okay.
We're looking at a direct clash between two completely different operating systems for what counts as true. On one side, you have the system of science and reason, and on the other, the system of faith and tradition.
And I want to be really clear with everyone listening. While the source material we're using today is famously about religion versus atheism, you should keep a much, much broader lens in mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the mechanisms we're going to pull apart today, things like how offense is used as a tool, the function of taboo, how certainty can be manufactured out of thin air, these apply everywhere. You'll see them in politics, on social media, maybe even in your own office's HR department.
It's the architecture. We're looking at the architecture of how ideas protect themselves from being criticized.
So what's the source?
Our source material for this deep dive is a book called The Four Horsemen, the conversation that sparked an atheist revolution.
Okay, and just to put another clear boundary on this, we are not hosting a theological debate today. Our goal is not to prove or disprove the existence of God.
No, definitely not. That would take a lot more than the time we have, and frankly, it's just not our project here. Our mission is to analyze the patterns that are revealed in this text.
And what is the text exactly?
It's a transcript.
Yeah.
A literal word-for-word transcript of a single 2-hour unmoderated conversation that took place back in 2007.
Just a few guys in a room.
A few very specific guys. The participants were Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. 4 intellectual heavyweights at the absolute peak of their influence.
And that context is so important. This wasn't some formal debate on a stage with a moderator and a bell. This was, from what I understand, just the 4 of them around a table with some wine, essentially comparing notes from the front lines of a culture war they found themselves in.
That's it. Stephen Fry, who wrote the foreword to the book, he calls them the musketeers of the mind. And he makes a really key point. He says they were publicly battered for the positions they took.
And that pushback, that battering, is our first real clue. It tells us they must have hit a nerve in the system.
A very, very sensitive nerve. To understand why, you have to set the scene. You have to remember what the world felt like in 2007.
The millennial background, as they call it.
Right. It's a very specific kind of pressure cooker. The world is still very much in the shadow of 9/11. The Iraq War is raging.
So there's this global conflict framed, at least partly, in religious terms.
Absolutely. And then inside the U.S., you have the height of the George W. Bush era, which means the rise of a very politically powerful evangelical fundamentalism. You have intense debates over things like teaching intelligent design in public schools.
So you have this pincer movement, a sense of being under attack from religious extremism abroad and a kind of religious anti-rationalism at home.
Exactly. And there's this feeling among these 4 men and others like them that the entire Enlightenment project, the very idea of reason itself, was under siege.
And right into that environment, these 4 guys, all working independently, dropped these massive best-selling books.
One after the other. It was an incredible publishing phenomenon between 2004 and 2007. You get Harris's The End of Faith, then Dawkins' The God Delusion, Dennett's Breaking the Spell, and finally, Hitchens' God is Not Great.
And the shockwave from these books wasn't just that they were atheist books. I mean, atheism has been around forever.
No, that wasn't it. The system shock was that they broke a fundamental rule. An unwritten rule of public discourse. They broke the rule of immunity.
The gentleman's agreement.
The gentleman's agreement, precisely. The unspoken deal in liberal societies was this. You can criticize a politician's tax policy. You can tear apart a scientist's data. You can write a scathing review of a movie.
But
you do not go after someone's deeply held religious beliefs. That's considered private. It's off limits. It's sacred.
And these four basically said, no, it's not. If it makes claims about reality, it's fair game.
It's not only fair game, it's a public responsibility to examine it. So what this conversation really reveals, when you look at it as a system, is how this science versus faith conflict actually functions as a public legitimacy contest.
It's not just about the facts, Big Bang versus Genesis.
Not at all. The core conflict is about the rules of engagement themselves.
Yeah.
Science is a set of rules. Peer review, falsifiability, or reliance on doubt. Faith has another set. Revelation, scripture, and as we'll see, a powerful taboo against direct criticism.
And that's our thesis. We're exploring that collision of two incompatible systems.
Right.
Okay, let's get into the machinery of it. I want to start with that taboo you mentioned, because very early in the transcript, Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher and comes across as a very mild-mannered person, especially next to someone like Hitchens, he raises this fascinating point about rudeness.
Yes. Dennett is almost like a systems biologist for ideas. He wants to know how they survive and protect themselves in a hostile environment. And he talks about his own experience writing his book, Breaking the Spell.
He was trying to be the good cop in this group, right?
Very much so. He went out of his way to be polite, to be respectful. He says in the transcript that he even test flew early drafts of his book with his religious students to make sure he wasn't being, unnecessarily harsh or offensive.
He wanted to be the reasonable guy, the one you could actually have a civil conversation with.
Exactly. But it didn't matter. It didn't work. He still got absolutely hammered in the reviews and in the public response for being rude, aggressive, and strident.
The same words they use for Hitchens.
The exact same words. And this led him to a really crucial insight about the design of the system he was trying to engage with. He says, and it's a direct quote, "The religions have contrived to make it impossible to disagree with them critically without being rude."
Wow. That's a system-level observation. It's a trap.
It's a perfect trap. If the only way to disagree is to be critical, and any and all criticism is predefined as rudeness, then you've created a situation where your opponent is discredited before they even open their mouth.
If you criticize, you're rude. And if you're rude, well, then we don't have to listen to you. Your argument doesn't matter because your tone was off.
It's a brilliant defensive perimeter. Dennett calls it playing their hurt feelings card. He points out that religious institutions and individual believers are trained to play this card to shut down a debate before it can even begin.
It's a kind of emotional protectionism.
That's a perfect phrase for it. And think about how different that is from the scientific system. If I'm a physicist and I publish a paper and another physicist writes a rebuttal saying, "Your calculations on dark matter are completely wrong, here's the proof."
You'd be annoyed, maybe embarrassed if they were right.
Sure, my ego might take a hit. But I wouldn't be offended in a moral or spiritual sense. I wouldn't be able to say, "You have hurt my deepest, most sacred feelings by questioning my math." That would be ridiculous.
Right. Sam Harris jumps in on this point in the conversation, too. He basically says physicists aren't offended when their theories are disproved. They're corrected. That's the whole point of the system.
The operating system of science is correction. But the operating system of faith, he argues, is protection. And Harris points out this taboo is so powerful that even non-religious people, secularists, they abide by it all the time.
We're all trained to do it.
We are. We're trained from childhood to think, oh, that's their faith. I have to respect it. And respect, in this context, has come to mean do not examine too closely. Do not apply the same critical standards you'd apply to, say, a financial plan or a medical diagnosis.
It's like walking into a room where everyone is playing a very serious game. And even if you aren't playing, the rule is you have to whisper so you don't disturb them.
A perfect analogy. And then, of course, you have Hitchens.
Who is never, ever afraid of being called rude.
Laughs. No. Hitchens just completely rejects the premise of the game. He refuses to play. Instead, he flips the entire board over. He creates a counter system. He argues that if offense is going to be the currency of this debate, then he is the one who is truly offended.
Right. He says he's offended by the idea of a celestial dictatorship.
It's a classic Hitchens rhetorical move, a judo flip. He completely reframes the religious worldview. He doesn't see it as a comforting community or a source of moral guidance. He sees it as a blueprint for a totalitarian system.
A celestial North Korea.
That's his phrase for it. He describes it as a system of inescapable 24/7 supervision, where a divine dictator watches your every move, reads your every thought, and can even convict you of thought crimes after you're dead.
Thought crimes. That's straight out of Orwell.
Hitchens was a deep student of Orwell, and he applies that lens directly here. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, "I am in fact offended. I think all people of liberty ought to be offended by the proposition that without a supernatural celestial dictatorship, we wouldn't be capable of telling right from wrong."
That's a total reversal of the power dynamic in the argument. He's seizing the language of victimhood and offense for his own side.
He is. He's saying, you don't get to claim the moral high ground of being the wounded party here. Your core idea is an aggressor against human dignity and liberty.
And from a systems perspective, what he's doing is trying to break the enforcement mechanism,
Right.
the mechanism of social shame.
Yes, by claiming the right to be offended by religion, he neutralizes the weapon of hurt feelings. He makes it a two-way street.
Okay, so that's the outer wall of the fortress, the offense mechanism. I want to move to the next layer of this architecture, which is about how certainty is manufactured and maintained inside the walls.
Right.
Because there's this really strange inversion of terms that they all discuss. We've all heard it. Scientists, and by extension atheists, are often painted as arrogant or know-it-alls.
While religious leaders and believers are framed as being humble.
Exactly. But Dawkins, in the text, he spends a lot of time systematically taking that idea apart. He calls it the inversion of hubris and humility.
He does. And you can see why it's such a powerful narrative for the religious system. It's a brilliant piece of branding.
Walk us through that, though, because on the surface, the scientist who stands up and says, "I know for a fact that we evolved from other primates over millions of years," that sounds pretty confident, pretty certain.
Yeah, it does sound confident, but you have to look at the incentive structures and the underlying methodology. In the scientific marketplace of ideas, you gain long-term credibility not by pretending you know everything, but by being crystal clear about what you don't know.
You have to show your work and also show where the work stops.
Precisely. Dawkins brings up what he calls the deep problems. These are the absolute frontiers of human knowledge. Things like, why do the fundamental constants of physics have the specific values they do? What is the origin of consciousness? Why is there something rather than nothing in the first place?
The big, big questions, the stuff that keeps philosophers and physicists up at night.
The biggest. And the scientific answer to those questions, as Dawkins points out, is we don't know yet. We have some interesting hypotheses, we're working on it, but we don't have the answer. That, he argues, is genuine humility. It's an honest admission of ignorance.
Okay, so that's the humility of science. What's the hubris of religion, then?
The hubris of religion, in his view, is that it claims to have the definitive answers to all of those deep problems and more. The religious system doesn't just claim to know that the universe was created. It claims to know the mind of the creator.
And what the creator wants from us.
It claims to know exactly what this cosmic creator wants you to eat, what words you can say, who you're allowed to sleep with, and what will happen to your consciousness for all of eternity after your brain stops functioning.
And all of this is claimed without a single shred of verifiable evidence.
That's the core of it. Dawkins argues that to claim you have a direct, personal channel to the mind of the entity that created space-time and quantum mechanics, that is the ultimate cosmic-level arrogance. But the system has brilliantly succeeded in branding that posture as faith, and therefore as humility.
It's a total branding victory.
Like a complete one. And Sam Harris builds on this by pointing out that this creates a kind of a closed logical loop. He talks about a bootstrap mechanism.
The bootstrap of faith. Okay, explain how that self-reinforcing loop works.
So in any rational system, a belief needs to be supported by evidence. The weaker the evidence, the weaker the belief should be. But in the religious system, the act of believing without evidence is not seen as a bug or a flaw. It's reframed as the central feature. It's a virtue.
The story of doubting Thomas from the Bible.
The classic example. Jesus basically says to him, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." The message is clear. Demanding evidence is a spiritual failure. True virtue lies in believing in spite of or because of the lack of evidence.
Wow. When you put it that way, it's brilliant system design. The biggest security flaw in the code is marketed as the most desirable feature.
It creates what Harris calls a perpetual motion machine of self-deception. Once you accept the premise that faith, which is just a nice word for belief without evidence, is a noble and reliable pathway to truth, you have effectively insulated the entire system from any and all external data.
You can't use facts to dismantle a system that prides itself on its ability to ignore facts.
You can't. The system just relabels the attempt as a test of your faith.
This connects directly to another tool that the system uses, which is this idea of finding meaning anywhere. I loved the anecdote Harris tells in the book about the cookbook
Well,
experiment.
the woke-seared shrimp, yes.
It's so absurd on its face, but it illustrates the point perfectly. Can you tell the listeners about it?
Sure. So Harris is trying to demonstrate how confirmation bias is not a bug in the religious operating system, but a central feature. He says, as a thought experiment, he went into a bookstore, picked up a completely random cookbook, opened it to a recipe for woke-seared shrimp, and then he proceeded to apply a mystical interpretation to it.
So, like, the shrimp swimming in the sea represents the wandering soul.
And the searing heat of the wok represents the trials of life that purify us.
And the soy sauce represents, I don't know, divine grace.
Exactly. He says, I found a mystical interpretation. And his point is profound. If you are preconditioned to find magic and profundity, you will find it. Anywhere. You can play this game of connect the dots with any text in the world, whether it's Moby Dick or the back of a cereal box.
It's not that the text itself is magical, it's that the method of reading is designed to generate a feeling of meaning, regardless of the actual content.
It's a lens. If you teach someone to wear the faith lens, the phone book can become a book of prophecy. And that is an incredibly powerful tool for maintaining the authority of the original sacred text.
How so?
Because if the text doesn't make logical sense, if the Bible have clear contradictions, or the Quran has verses that seem cruel or vague, the system teaches you that the fault lies with you, the reader, not with the text.
So it's my fault. I just haven't read it spiritually enough. I don't have enough faith.
You're not looking through the lens correctly. It brilliantly shifts the burden of proof from the text onto the user, and it guarantees the text can never fail.
Which brings us to the people who are sort of caught in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
We have the so-called Four Horsemen on one side, the outspoken critics, we have the fundamentalists on the other, but the transcript spends a huge amount of time talking about the moderates.
The moderate trap, yes. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding why this system is so resilient and persistent. Because your average person might think, well, okay, but most religious people aren't suicide bombers or, young earth creationists, so what's the big deal?
Right, they're just nice people who volunteer at the soup kitchen and go to church on Christmas and Easter. They're not the problem.
But the horsemen, particularly Harris and Hitchens, argue that moderation actually provides the essential cover and legitimacy for the fundamentalism to thrive. They keep coming back to the no true Scotsman fallacy.
Okay, let's define that for everyone. No true Scotsman.
It's a classic informal logical fallacy. It's a way you try to protect a generalization about a group by retroactively changing the definition of the group to exclude any bad examples.
So if someone says all Scotsmen are brave, and I reply, well, my Uncle Angus from Glasgow was a coward, the first person says.
But no true Scotsman would be a coward, you see. They just kick Angus out of the definition of true Scotsman to protect their original claim.
It's a way to purify your group identity by simply disowning any members who embarrass you.
Stephen Fry actually brings this up in his foreword regarding Buddhism. He talks about seeing news reports of violent Buddhist monks in Myanmar who were complicit in the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya Muslims. And the immediate Western reaction is always, oh, but they can't be proper Buddhists.
Because real Buddhism is all about peace and mindfulness.
Exactly. This fallacy allows the religious system as a whole to disown all of its negative outputs, the violence, the ignorance, the bigotry, the oppression, while simultaneously taking full credit for all of its positive outputs, like charity, community, and beautiful art. It's a PR filtering mechanism.
And there's another piece to this moderate trap, which is the issue of what Hitchens and Dawkins call intellectual dishonesty, specifically when it comes to metaphors. They keep circling back to the story of the Garden of Eden.
Yes, this is a very sharp and, I think, uncomfortable critique they make. They observe a specific pattern of retreat. When science comes along and conclusively disproves a literal religious claim like, the world was created in 6 literal 24-hour days, or all humans are descended from 2 people named Adam and Eve.
The system doesn't say, oops, we were wrong about that.
Never. The system shifts the goalpost. The leaders of the system, the theologians and sophisticated clergy will say, oh, of course we never meant that literally. It was always meant as a beautiful metaphor for the human condition.
We always knew it was a poem.
Right. But here's the friction point that Hitchens and Dawkins press on. The clergy, the educated elites of the system, they often do know it's a metaphor. They go to seminary, they study biblical criticism, they know full well the earth is 4.5 billion years old.
But
but they allow and sometimes even encourage their congregations, the mass audience, the lay people, to continue believing its literal history.
And why? Is it because the literal belief is what drives the real passion and engagement?
It drives the fervor. It drives the fear of hell and the promise of heaven. It's what gets people to tithe and to show up every Sunday. Hitchens, in particular, frames this as a form of profound intellectual betrayal. He says he wants to ask the moderate, sophisticated bishop, are you going to stand up in front of your flock and tell them they are mistaken for believing Adam and Eve were real people? Or are you going to let them continue believing a demonstrable falsehood because it's convenient for maintaining your authority?
It's a system that thrives on that ambiguity. It lets the fundamentalist in the back pew hear literal truth, while the skeptical intellectual in the front pew hears profound metaphor, and the bishop gets to preside over both.
And that moderate shield, the respectable face of the religion, is what protects the fundamentalist core. As Sam Harris argues very forcefully, as long as a society agrees to respect the principle of faith, the idea that belief without evidence is valid, we have no consistent logical ground to stand on when we criticize the extremist who has faith that God wants him to blow up a bus.
Because the moderate validates the method of knowing, even if they disagree with the violent conclusions someone else draws from it.
You've given the game away at the first step.
This seems like a good place to bring in the rabbit and the Precambrian. This is one of my favorite illustrations of the difference between these two systems.
Laughs. It's the ultimate what-if scenario for a biologist. It's a beautiful example of falsifiability.
Right. So, in the conversation, Harris asks the group, is there anything that would shake your faith in atheism? Is there an argument out there that gives you pause? And they kind of struggle to come up with one, but then they flip the question.
They flip it to science. And the question becomes, what piece of evidence could, in a single stroke, destroy the entire theory of evolution? And the biologist J.B.S. Haldane famously gave the answer, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian.
Okay, you have to explain the timeline there for people who aren't paleontologists.
The Precambrian is an unimaginably ancient geological era. We're talking over 540 million years ago. It's the age of single-celled organisms, very simple life forms. Complex life, let alone mammals like rabbits, hadn't even begun to evolve.
So if we dug into a rock layer that was, say, 600 million years old, and we found a perfectly preserved fossil of a rabbit,
the entire edifice of modern biology would come crashing down overnight. It would be a complete violation of everything we know about the history of life. The theory would be falsified. Done.
It creates what you could call a system vulnerability. The entire system of science is, in a way, fragile because it's built on this principle of being falsifiable.
Falsifiability is the key concept from the philosopher of science Karl Popper. He argued that if a theory cannot, even in principle, be proven wrong, that it isn't a scientific theory at all. It's something else. So science's greatest weakness, that it can be destroyed by a single piece of contradictory evidence, is also its greatest strength.
Because it means the system is actually tethered to reality, it has to match the data from the real world.
It does. But what about the religious system?
What happens if you find the rabbit in the Precambrian?
Nothing. The religious system just absorbs the new data without changing. A believer can just say, well, God put the rabbit there to test our faith, or the devil planted that fossil to deceive us, or simply, God works in mysterious ways.
The religious system is designed from the ground up to be invincible to contrary data.
Which makes it incredibly durable over centuries.
But also means it cannot correct its own errors. It can't learn from the world. A system that can't be falsified is a system that is trapped in its own assumptions forever.
And that's the fundamental divide.
I want to spend some time mapping out the different actors in this system. We have the horsemen, the critics, we have the fundamentalist clergy. But there's a really specific type of actor they spend a lot of time on. The scientist who also believes. They use Francis Collins as the key example.
Yes. Francis Collins is a fascinating case study in the text. Here you have a man who is, by any measure, a brilliant world-class scientist. He led the Human Genome Project. His entire career is built on rigorous, evidence-based reasoning.
And yet,
he is also a devout evangelical Christian who believes, as a matter of fact, in the physical resurrection of Jesus from the dead.
And Dawkins, in the conversation, seems genuinely personally baffled by this. He keeps asking in different ways, how can a single brain be so perfectly split down the middle?
It's the split brain phenomenon. How can a person apply the most rigorous skepticism in the laboratory from Monday to Friday, demanding double-blind trials, peer review, statistical significance, and then on Sunday accept a 2,000-year-old story about a virgin birth and a man rising from the dead with literally zero empirical evidence to support it.
Sam Harris offers a really interesting systems-level insight here. He suggests that it's the cultural taboo we talked about earlier that allows this to happen. It protects these individuals.
Well,
He argues that a scientist like Collins can go through their entire professional career without ever once having their religious contradictions seriously challenged by their peers.
because it would be impolite to ask.
Yeah.
It would be considered an invasion of his private beliefs.
Exactly. Harris makes the point that if Francis Collins believed with equal fervor that Elvis was still alive and secretly living in a moon base, his scientific credibility would be instantly questioned.
Of course. People would say, wait a minute, does this guy have a problem with evaluating evidence? Should we recheck his work on the genome?
But because his equally unfounded belief is religious, it's granted a special immunity from that kind of scrutiny.
It's a protected category of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And Harris's point is that this social agreement allows what he calls the partitioning of the mind to persist indefinitely. The system doesn't force these individuals to reconcile the two completely different epistemic systems they're running in their own head.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the geopolitical feedback loop. A very significant part of this conversation, and we have to remember, this is 2007, the height of the Iraq War, is focused on Islam and what they call the crisis of Islam.
This is where Christopher Hitchens really takes the lead in the conversation. And we have to be very careful here to frame this as their analysis of the system dynamics at that specific moment in time.
Right, this is a report on their argument, not an endorsement of it. Hitchens argues that there's a dangerous feedback loop at play.
He does. The loop, as he describes it, is this: dogmatic religious certainty within parts of the Islamic world,
Leads to the dehumanization of anyone outside the faith, the infidels.
which then leads to religiously motivated violence, like 9/11.
Which in turn leads to a fearful, defensive, and often equally certain reaction in the West. And the cycle repeats and escalates.
And Hitchens is very martial in his language about this. He uses the word extirpation.
Extirpation, that's a strong word. It means to rip out by the roots, to completely destroy.
It is. It's a violent word. And he's unapologetic about it. He argues that you cannot negotiate or have a polite dialogue with a theocratic system that is openly dedicated to your destruction. He views the conflict as existential. He says something to the effect of, I have no interest at all in what jihadists are thinking. I'm only interested in refining the methods of destroying them.
Which is a stark, stark contrast to someone like Daniel Dennett.
A complete contrast.
Yeah.
Dennett is still the good cop. He's still the philosopher asking, can the spell be broken gently? Can we find a way to cure the virus of dogma while keeping the patient, the community, the culture alive? He's looking for the conditions that would allow for reformation within Islam, not necessarily an all-out war.
But all four of them seem to agree that the moderate voices in the Muslim world, at least in 2007, were not being vocal or effective enough in countering the extremists.
And this circles right back to the moderate trap we discussed. If the moderate majority remains silent, either out of fear or because they share the same foundational sacred text and the same core premise of faith as the extremists, then the extremists will always get to drive the public narrative.
There's also a fascinating point Harris makes here about the textual constraint of the holy books themselves. He argues that Islam has a structurally harder time reforming than, say, Christianity.
Why is that?
He argues it's because of the nature of the book itself. The Bible, for all its claims, is a collection of different documents written by different human authors over many centuries. Even many believers view it as divinely inspired, but still written by fallible men.
Which gives you some wiggle room. You can say, oh, that part in Leviticus was just a product of its time, or Paul was a bit of a misogynist. Exactly. You can historicize it. But the Quran, within Islamic theology, is understood differently. It's claimed to be the direct, literal, unmediated word of God dictated verbatim to the Prophet Muhammad.
So it's not inspired by God, it is the word of God.
It is. It's a dictation. And if it's a direct dictation from an infallible deity, you can't really edit it. You can't say, well, God was just using a metaphor here, or God was a little harsh in this verse. It makes theological reform much more difficult.
The system is designed to be more rigid.
And therefore more brittle. If you can't bend, you're more likely to break, or you're more likely to fight to the death to protect that rigidity from any challenge.
Let's bring this forward to today, because, as we said at the very beginning of this deep dive, these mechanisms are not confined to religion anymore. This hurt feelings economy, for example, it feels like it's the dominant currency of our time.
It has absolutely escaped the lab of theology and gone viral in the culture at large. The mechanism that Dennett identified, the strategy of shutting down debate by claiming offense, has become a universal tool.
We see it on university campuses, in corporate culture, all over social media.
All the time. When you hear someone say, your argument makes me feel unsafe, or that question is a form of violence, that is the secularized version of the same tactic.
It's safetyism as the new form of the religious taboo.
Precisely. If an idea can be successfully framed as harmful or offensive, it gets to bypass the entire process of forensic scrutiny. You no longer have to prove that the idea is factually wrong. You just have to assert that it hurts.
That is a direct inheritance. It's the same software of immunity that the Horsemen were critiquing, just running on a different platform.
Yes. And we see the bootstrapping of authority everywhere in politics now. The idea that I feel this to be true, and that feeling is a more valid form of knowledge than your so-called facts or data.
Truthiness, as Stephen Colbert called it, alternative facts. The text talks about how faith validates intuition over evidence. Well, just look at our modern political discourse.
You have large segments of the population who believe things, that an election was stolen or that vaccines contain microchips, with the passion of a religious conviction, purely based on community reinforcement and a feeling of intuition in the face of all available evidence.
It's the cookbook experiment at a massive scale. If I read the news every day through my chosen partisan lens, I can find evidence for my conspiracy theory absolutely anywhere.
And just like the religious system, this political tribalism has built-in defense mechanisms. It automatically relabels any attempt at fact-checking from the outside as fake news or mainstream media bias or part of the plot.
Which is the exact same immune response as labeling criticism of a religion militant atheism or Islamophobia. It's an antibody that attacks any foreign data.
It's epistemic closure.
Yeah.
The system seals itself off from reality to protect the integrity of the belief.
There is another really powerful and, I think, poignant theme in the book that helps explain why these systems are so difficult to break. It's what we could call the numinous void.
Ah, yes, the question of the empty churches.
Dawkins is pretty straightforward about it. He says he wants the church to be empty. He sees them as centers of irrationality. He's hardline. But Hitchens and Harris, you can hear them hesitate a little bit.
They do. And this is a nuance that is so often missed by the critics who just want to paint them all as angry, destructive atheists. Hitchens, for instance, had a deep love for the language of the King James Bible. He loved church architecture, he loved the poetry, the sound of a requiem mass.
He admits there's an X factor, a deep and probably innate human need for the transcendent, for the sacred, for what's called the numinous.
Harris talks about this constantly in his other work, too. He talks about the human need for profundity. He warns that if secular society just becomes about consumerism and, trimming your hedges and watching reality TV, if it's just about the triviality of modern life, then people will rightly reject it.
This is a massive structural insight into the problem. If the rational system we're offering only provides cold, hard facts, the keen wind of reality, as Dawkins memorably calls it, and the religious system, for all its flaws, offers community, ritual, art, comfort in the face of death, and a grand sense of cosmic purpose.
The religious system has a much better product-market fit for the emotional, narrative-driven human brain.
So, if we succeed in stripping away the dogma, but we fail to replace the community, the ritual, and the sense of awe, we just leave a giant vacuum.
A vacuum that nature abhors. And it will be filled by something. Maybe it's a new, more intense religion. Maybe it's a political cult. Maybe it's a sprawling conspiracy theory that gives life meaning. The warning from this text, perhaps an unintentional one, is that just breaking the spell is not enough. You have to offer a compelling new story to take its place.
Dawkins tries to do that, doesn't he? With his work on the poetry of reality, the wonder of the cosmos.
He does, and it's a beautiful effort. He argues very persuasively that the real universe, with its galaxies and black holes, the 4 billion-year story of evolution, the intricate code of DNA, is so much more majestic and awe-inspiring than any Bronze Age myth. But the open question remains. Can that scientific awe console a grieving mother at a funeral?
Can it build a tight-knit community that shows up with casseroles when you're sick?
Can it provide the rituals that mark the passages of life? That's the challenge. You could say we're running secularism 1.0, and it's still very buggy on the community and meaning fronts.
And the Four Horsemen in this context are essentially the developers who are trying to point out the critical security flaws in the old Religion 5.0 operating system.
Yes, they're saying this old system is riddled with viruses, it's inefficient, and it's causing the whole global computer to crash. We need a fundamental upgrade.
But a huge portion of the users are saying, but I like the interface. It's comforting and familiar, and it's what I've always known.
And that is the essential conflict. It's the friction between the comfort of the user interface and the truth of the underlying code.
Which connects directly back to the central theme of our whole project here at Crisis in Perception, the idea that perception is socially manufactured. Stephen Fry, in his foreword, uses the classic Emperor's New Clothes analogy.
The Hans Christian Andersen story, yeah. The authority of the clergy or the party leader or the celebrity expert is often maintained simply because everyone agrees not to point out the obvious. No one dares to be the one to point and laugh.
But once someone does, once the Horsemen publish their books and they hit the bestseller list, the spell is weakened. The perception starts to shift.
It weakens, absolutely. But the system is resilient. It fights back. It adapts. It retreats to metaphor, as we discussed. It plays the victim card. It relabels the critics as strident, shrill, and angry to discredit them. The system doesn't just give up.
So after analyzing all these mechanisms and feedback loops, where does this leave us?
I think it leaves us face to face with the ultimate confrontation. A confrontation not with God, but with uncertainty.
This was a huge theme for Hitchens. He often said something like, our beliefs should be congruent with the evidence, and our opinions must be congruent with uncertainty.
It's arguably the hardest intellectual and emotional discipline there is, to simply stand in the face of the biggest questions and have the courage to say, I don't know. The book argues that admitting we don't know isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of profound courage. It requires what they call intellectual adulthood.
And the alternative, the false certainty offered by dogma, is framed as a kind of prolonged childhood.
Yes, a childhood where a cosmic, all-knowing father figure protects you, tells you the rules, and promises you'll never really die. To grow up, in their view, means accepting that you might be alone in a vast, indifferent universe, and that we, as humans, have the terrifying and liberating responsibility to make our own rules and create our own meaning.
Which is, for many people, a terrifying prospect.
It's terrifying, but also potentially liberating. And so the final provocation I'd leave the listener with is this. Can a society, can a civilization really function on a foundation of uncertainty? Can we build a durable world based on the scientific principles of correction and doubt? Or will the human mind always, eventually, retreat to the psychological safety and protection of a dogma?
That is the question to chew on. Can we, as a species, actually handle the truth? Or do we fundamentally need the story?
Indeed.
This deep dive was based on the Four Horsemen, the conversation that sparked an atheist revolution, featuring Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, with a foreword by Stephen Fry.
It's a really remarkable document of a specific intellectual moment. We'd strongly encourage you to read the full transcript yourself, to experience the wit, the humor, and the sheer intellectual velocity of that original dialogue.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.